Once you know what exercises to do, what do you do?
Is the point of progressive overload.
Having this very slight gradual improvement over time, you look better, get stronger, get healthy.
Just going in and just picking things up and going, oh, this is kind of hard, this works, I guess.
Instead of trying to do 20 extra pounds, realizing it's not going to work, your whole workout kind of gets a little skewed because you can't do the same weights forever and still get gains.
Welcome to the Lucid Fitness Podcast. I'm Erik and this is Sarah, and we started Lucid Fitness to help beginners find actionable guidance in a sea of fitness and nutrition information.
You're working on consistency and you're working on doing compound movements, but I'm sure at this point you're wondering, how do I get any stronger? And that would be the principle of progressive overload. We're going to make our bodies do more so that we're able to adapt and overcome. What is progressive overload though?
Progressive overload is a means of continuous progression, right? A means to continuously make gains, to continuously improve strength, whatever it is your goals are. Improving health, improving strength, improving body composition, all of those are best improved by applying the principle of progressive overload. Progressive overload as an idea is making slight changes over time, slight increases over time to be specific in what you're doing to make it slightly more demanding on the body, slightly more difficult. And what it does is by having this very slight gradual improvement over time, you look better, get stronger, get healthier, whatever it may be. And so progressive overload in the fitness sense is generally applied through the traditional means of increasing your weight or increasing your reps or increasing the number of sets you do. Those are the traditional ones. Some people use, reduction of rest time or number of times they go to the gym, but similar to the first core principle of finding a routine that fits in your life, you also want to kind of find a means of progressive overload that fits for you. It's not always just one specific means of progressive overload. Oftentimes, and you and I specifically, we use reps and weight as our primary drivers of progressive overload because it feels, for us, it feels most natural to do that. Some people go purely off of, just weight, and they're always trying to drive the weight up, or they're just trying to increase volumes. And that does work, but for the time constraint that we have, we're generally trying to aim for an increase that doesn't increase the amount of time. Like adding 2 to 4 additional reps in an exercise, while it does add time, obviously, because you're doing more, it's a lot less than adding a whole nother set or a whole nother exercise or, a substantial amount of volume. And so usually these traditional means of progressive overload are used because they are the most effective, in Lucid Fitness, we believe in using efficient means of doing things. That's our whole point. And if you're only able to go an hour per workout, the most effective means of progressive overload is going to be increasing your reps and increasing your weight and using some sort of mechanism of those two. And then if you have more time or you want to reduce your rest, because there's 2 aspects, you're either doing the movement or resting, right? And so if you reduce your rest, you have more time for the movement. And more time for the movement means you can increase reps or increase sets if you so choose, but it comes at a trade-off, right? And so if you rest less, you're going to get lower quality working sets. And so it's kind of learning what works for you. I think for beginners, honing in on the rest period that best works for you is super important. The reason for that is it kind of gives you the gauge on how many sets you can do in a workout. And the Lucid Fitness app, the algorithm really works in a way that it's built off of an average of 1.5 minute rest periods, which I feel like for beginners is usually you want between 1.5 minutes and 2. And then from there, it adds the 30 seconds usually for a single set. So 2 minutes functionally for a set. And then it takes however long you can be in the gym, say it's an hour. So you have an hour, 2 minutes, you have maximum of 30 sets, right? Which is still a lot for beginners to do in an hour, but you have to take into consideration warm-ups, take into consideration all of these other, kind of a tangent. And the big thing is to identify a means of progressing that you can do in a small enough interval that it isn't too much of a jump. And that small interval is an important part. It allows you to increase in a way that doesn't overload your central nervous system or your muscles or anything in a way that it doesn't really. By using the small intervals, it allows you to make the continuous adjustments because you tried this push, but I obviously can't do this weight. Instead, you do these small intervals that if you can do 8 of one weight, you can do 8 reps of, say, 45 pounds for your row. Going up to 10 reps, it's usually just a matter of, or going up 10 extra pounds is usually just a matter of doing maybe 2 or 3 less reps, because those small micro adjustments in weights can allow you to not lose a lot, feel like you're losing a lot of progress, because it's hard to, when you make these big jumps, it's hard to, especially at first, to see if you're making the progress or not, right? Because taking 8 reps of 45 pounds versus 3 reps of 85 pounds, it's hard to really see which one is technically better. Yeah, one's more weight, but is it more workload? And so by having the smaller increments, it makes it much more clear you're making progress, because those small incremental improvements, they shine through a lot easier.
Right. And it's like we talked about in our first podcast, which is that consistency over time. Being able to maintain this consistent rather than, taking large lunges up the stairs and not really sure where things are going, right? Now that we've kind of talked about progressive overload itself, I'm sure that there are going to be people who ask, but why? What is the point of progressive overload? Getting stronger or what? But let's break it down to what we're actually doing with progressive overload.
Yeah, you're increasing the stresses in fitness sense, on your body, or as an inversion of it, if you're doing it with nutrition, say you're trying to slowly decrease your calories each week until you hit the 500 calorie mark. You're making small changes that over time, because we're in it for the long term at Lucid Fitness, over time, those small gradual increases, they make you, exactly as you said, they make you stronger, they make you better looking. Because this sport moves at such a slow rate, it's a very natural thing to also increase the amount of weight you're lifting by a small amount, and increase the nutritional value of your diet by a small amount. But in the scope of fitness, it gives you slow incremental increases that kind of align with the slow incremental increases of your strength and body composition. Changing your body takes a long time, right? And that's through a combination of small improvements of your diet and small improvements of your fitness. And the improvements are your choice of progressive overload, right? And usually, and it's why in previous videos we talked about the importance of having gym equipment and having an increasing amount of weight, is because you can't do the same weights forever and still get gains. And so by continuously improving the amount of weight or continuously improving the amount of reps or sets that you're doing, it makes your body adapt over and over and over again. Because once you get used to 45-pound row, you go up to 50-pound row and it's challenging again, and your body's forced to readapt. Right. And so that's what we're doing, is we're forcing our body to readapt in the smallest amount of change we can, because the change that we're expecting from our body and from our health and from our fitness is a small change itself. So it kind of aligns with, the small incremental improvements go hand in hand with the changes of our body and how long it takes, right? That's not to say you can't make larger jumps. Yeah. Especially in the beginning, it's very normal on these big compound movements that we prioritize. It's very normal to expect large strength gains. And that's why we do the compound movements, because not only is it nice to, see these numbers go up rapidly versus, 5 pounds per week. The idea is like get to the point where our body is not necessarily plateauing, but like hitting a ceiling. And then when you push through it, your body is forced to get stronger. Right. And so until you read, and you see it really early in the beginners, because they have a lot of nervous system adaptations that happen. They get a lot of strength gain through that. They get a lot of improvements through coordination, just learning the movements, all the things we talked about on the last video. Those go into those initial first jumps. But once you reach the higher levels of the sport, it starts to become, those increments start becoming much more significant, right? Because it's like, even though it's a smaller amount of a jump, when you're banging up against your ceiling and your maximum capacity of how much you can do for that movement, it takes a lot more effort to get through it. And so you see a lot, you start out really fast and you kind of slow down, and then like the stairs you were mentioning, you slow down for a little and then you find some new tweak that improves it and it hops you up to the next. And that's the name of the game. That's how you grow. That's how you get better in all aspects of your life.
Yeah, because fundamentally humans are animals that are very good at adapting, right? We are very good at adapting our bodies to diet and exercise. That's how we've been able to survive so long, right? And so what we're doing is small incrementing wise, causing our body to adapt little by little so that we're not, stuck in the gym lifting 5 pounds for the next 6 months going, well, why don't I look any better? Why am I not burning any more calories? What am I doing? Right. Well, you've now adapted to that, and it's now no longer difficult for you. And that's kind of the idea, right? Progressive overload is increasing that difficulty, because at a certain point, what's really hard right now is not going to be hard anymore, just because we're so good at adapting.
Right, for sure. And people who have been at it for a long time they sometimes lose sight of the fact that it's always supposed to remain difficult, right? And we see it often. People get to a point where they've succeeded at whatever their original goal was, and then they kind of just stagnate, and you have to reevaluate as you go. Part of the progressive overload mechanism is learning what works and learning what you need to change for that next level up, because not every step of the way is going to have the same returns for you. What's really the jump from losing your noob gains, your beginner gains, to entering more of a intermediate type of skill, you need to really know and be honed in on what your body's responding to past your noob gains, because I see it fairly often that people reach this 2, 3, 4 year mark and they just kind of get stuck. And it's because those initial gains, they carry you very far, and it makes you feel like, oh, I'm doing everything right. But then you reach this level and then you realize like, okay, I have to reevaluate how many sets I'm doing, how many reps I'm doing, my mechanism of progressive overload. I was reducing my rest, but I really can't rest less than this. I was just increasing my weight workout over workout, but it's getting harder and harder to do that. You need to reevaluate at these key points, and really hone in on, okay, well, increasing my weight every week isn't a feasible option anymore. I'm already at my maximum capacity. What means of improvements can I have? And that's when you start to connect your progressive overload to the more holistic whole that Lucid Fitness talks about. And you start seeing these connections to, okay, well, if I want to keep increasing my weight, maybe I have to have a bit more calories. Maybe I need to hone in on my proteins a little bit more. And maybe I need the higher quality fats in my diet. All of those things, even though they're very small, they add up to these plateau busting mechanisms by by slowly feeding into something that you feel like is stuck. And so you really start to see the importance of nutrition somewhere along the way.
And recovery.
Yeah.
And sleep and recovery, allowing your body to heal. You are essentially, in a controlled manner, causing quote unquote damage so that your body is forced to adapt to do the thing you're asking it to do. Right? That's what lifting heavy weights is. You're lifting this heavy thing, your body's going, oh man, that's really heavy. You're causing a little bit of damage that's then, okay, we need to build into being able to do this because that's what you're asking of me. Right. And that goes for all sorts of things. But yeah, when you get to a point where you're like, maybe you've been gaining, adding weight every single week, but you're getting to the point where you really can't add weight anymore, that's when you start honing in on the cardio aspect and bringing down that, that rest time to make it more difficult on your body, allowing it to then adapt in a different way that makes you break through.
And I think the key idea is it's hard until it's not, right? What's hard to you on your first few workouts isn't going to be hard for you down the road. It would be very unusual if your strength and your body didn't get better over time. But there will be times where you do start to go weeks instead of days where you see progress. You start going weeks before you really see some change in your strength or your look. Or when you're very far along, you can go months before you really start to notice. It's like, man, I look the same for a long time. And that's the journey, right? But the idea of it's hard until it's not, and like really looking at, is this challenging me in the way when I first started this weight? Is this challenging me in the way when I first started this routine? And really evaluating and reflecting on these things and specifically your means of progressive overload, and understanding that progressive overload doesn't have to be one narrow thing. It's not like, oh, I increase my weight every time. But like you said, we can reduce our rest. We can increase our sets if we have more time. And going back to the first core principle of finding a workout that fits into your life, this is kind of the reflection process that as you develop your skills more and as you start to become more in tune with what you're doing, you can reflect at a much more rapid rate and really identify, okay, I need to change this up sooner rather than later. So you get 16 weeks into your first year, you may start realizing like what exercises you do and do not like. You start realizing how you prefer to improve and how you prefer to progressively overload. Mm-hmm. And then you adapt accordingly, right? You end your routine and you go in knowing, well, this time I'm not going to do squats. Every time I do squats, hurts my back. I need to learn the form before I do it anymore. Let's try deadlifts for a little while. Something like that. That sort of logic is you start getting that very early, right? And start embracing the exploratory means of learning what works for you, right? And that's what we're trying to preach here, is that this is a self-feeding thing, right? We're never going to be able to give you one routine that for the rest of your life you can do and make improvements. It's just not how it works. You need new routines. You need to feed off of the things that you discover in your life work for you and continuously improve and build upon that, right? And so Lucid Fitness, and when we talk about progressive overload here, we're not trying to tell you this is how you do progressive overload. We're trying to give you the broad idea of what progressive overload is, and then you find the means and the mechanism of progressive overload that works for your routine that fits in your life and works for prioritizing compound exercises. And as you'll see later on, and you start to connect the dots, it applies to your nutrition and your mindfulness as well.
What that feels like we're talking about like what feels best for you to make that harder. We're saying, well, and you're going to make it more difficult. You're going to make it more hard. You're going to we're touching on this kind of broad idea of harder for you. Can we kind of hone in on what we mean by that? Because I know there can be a lot of mud in the water when people start talking and using big words like reps in reserve and push till failure and things like that. Can we kind of touch on, like, for someone who's really new, who wants to be adherent to this idea and wants to do progressive overload, when we're saying harder, like, what are we saying?
Right. And it's a hard thing to completely convey because it's subjective, right? What's a 5-pound jump to you is going to be drastically different than a 5-pound. We've talked about this several times. Like it's very different at different strength levels, different genetics. And so to go in and say, it's like, this is how it should feel is a difficult thing to do. But to me, when I say harder, it's a numbers game, right? It's like, am I lifting 45 pounds versus 50 pounds? If you're applying like a very small interval, it's not going to feel a whole lot different, but it should never feel easy, right? It should be challenging. When I say 8 to 12 reps, 8 should be, you have more in the tank, and 12, you shouldn't really be able to do 12 without being, close to out of strength or close to failure. The idea is to get comfortable learning what it feels like in that rep range. Like I specifically prefer the 8 to 12 rep range. So I design most of my routines around that because I'm very familiar with it. And people who want more strength gains will go into a lower rep range, usually, between 5 and 7, like we mentioned. People who want more endurance will go, 12, 15, 18, whatever. But the idea is to get comfortable with how a rep range feels. And then understanding that you're going to feel a different type of way at each rep in the 8 to 12. Like I personally, and I know you do too, once we start getting to 12, it's like, I'd rather just increase my weight than do 12 because it becomes more cardiovascular focused and it starts, demanding different parts of your body than just the muscle itself. And so when we work in 8 to 12, we often, we'll hit 12 and, would prefer to just go up the weight instead of continuously doing 12. But the idea of hard is like something that, it should feel like you're working out, right? And I can't tell you what's hard for every single person, but I can tell you most people understand when they went to the gym and they feel tired, right? Because you get two boats. You get the beginners who go gung-ho from the get-go and they overdo it and they're going way too hard. They were doing way too much volume and then they're 3 weeks in and their body's done. And then you have the ones who take a more gradual approach, but maybe they're not pushing themselves too much. And that's kind of the reflection that needs to happen in your life is like, am I challenged by this? Could I have done 5 more pounds? And it's okay. It's like, say you do, 50-pound row and you did 12 of them and you did all of your sets and it felt easy, right? That's fine. Next week, I'm going up weight so I can get back closer to something that's more challenging, right? And that's the beauty of, having a close eye on your progressive overload mechanism. It makes it a lot more clear that you're still improving because some workouts are going to be difficult and some are going to be easy, even if it's the same weight, right? Mm-hmm. There's days where I'll go in and say I'm bench pressing 50 pounds per arm in a dumbbell, right? Some days doing 8 of it feels hard. Some days doing 12 of it feels easy, depending on all the other variables like sleep and nutrition and recovery and all of those things. And so by tracking and using a means of tracking, it allows you to apply your progressive overload in a more rigid way. And that way you don't have to really worry about what feels hard. You can have a quantified progression, right? Like a lot of the times you'll bring it up to me. It's like, hey, I feel like I'm having a bad workout. And then I'll look at the numbers that I'm tracking. It's like every one of your lifts is up. It's like, does it feel like it's a bad workout because it's harder than usual? If so, it makes sense to be harder than usual. So even people who have been doing it for a long time, sometimes you lose grasp of like, what really is hard for me nowadays? But I know if both you and I went into a gym and just did 10-pound dumbbells on every movement, neither of us would be challenged, right? We do know that. And we got there through these means of progressive overload. When we were 10 pounds, we were working towards 12. And when we were 12, we were working towards 15. And I think that's also lost on beginners very frequently is this idea of of weight matters, right? And it does if you're trying to show off or you're trying to ego lift, or in the event you're trying to be a power lifter, but we're not catering to power lifters. We're catering to beginners. And so what I'm getting at is like the weight really doesn't matter. It's the fact, it's the increase that matters. It's the change over time that matters. And so what you're doing now, it really doesn't matter as long as you're doing more down the road.
The idea of being able to use, specifically for us, using the Lucid Fitness app and having it track, this is your reps, this is your sets, this is your weight, this is what you're going up, and being able to look at that and see it laid out in front of you per your workout every day, but then also learning and developing the ability to check in with yourself, check in with, wow, this feels hard, or no, this doesn't feel hard. And being kind of in tune with both of those things, not just going in and just picking things up and going, oh, this is kind of hard, this works, I guess. Yeah. And then going back and doing something totally different the next time. Right. We have some structure, but also looking at that structure and then understanding that there are other factors outside of that, and just always kind of being conscious of those things.
Because as a beginner, you just don't have the intuition to go into a gym and go off feel. Even I struggle with that sometimes. Like I've been doing it for a long time, many, many, many years. And I still feel like if I don't track properly now, I just don't feel like I get the full amount of gains, right? I just don't feel like I'm keeping track, because you're at the whim of your emotions. You're at the whim of your feeling. No matter how composed you are, you're going to have days where it's like, man, this feels really heavy. And if you don't have that log, that number to show, oh, it's heavier because actually it's heavy. It's what the next weight I should be doing. This should feel heavy. The tool can be used as a means of reminding you that this is where you need to be. You haven't fallen from grace because you had one less rep. And just looking at things, you start looking at things at a much more long time horizon. But going back to what you were saying about the app, is one of the beauties of the app is, while it's imperfect, it does try to assist you in the progressive overload. And so once you actually choose your routine, I showed it in the previous video, once you choose your routine, either custom or generated by the app, once you start running that app, it's real simple to just plug in your numbers, but it also shows you how you should be progressing. I think it tries to get you to go up one rep within the kind of how I was explaining earlier, one rep within your rep range until you hit the max and hit those numbers. And then it's like, okay, time for more weight. And so it'll walk you through the means that we use to improve consistently. And so you see the target in your previous, so you can see, I previously did this, my target is now 2 reps more, or whatever it advises you. And then you can target that, and it kind of short circuits the whole mental game, because now you have something like, I don't really need to think about it. It's like, I'm supposed to do 12. If I hit 12 or 11, I'm still improving. As long as I do more than last time, you're good. And there's times where you don't. And I would say probably 50% of my workouts aren't an improvement. Like that's just the name of the game. It's like there's days where you just don't improve. Maybe you didn't eat enough calories. Maybe you didn't eat enough protein. Maybe you lost 30 minutes of sleep because of your kids, right? Those things matter. Yeah. And that's why this sport's so beautiful, because it teaches you all of the things in your life that impact your health in a very direct way.
Being mindful and conscious, but forgiving with yourself. When you're in the gym and you're like, man, I should have done 10 and I can't even do it for 8 or 7. And then you take a little run back and go, oh, yeah, I didn't sleep because I was staying up and doing homework with the kids, and I just didn't eat dinner. And you kind of go, oh, okay, you know what? I'm going to remember to eat dinner tonight. And then you can just have that kind of like grace with yourself as you go back and check, and then also be more mindful going forward of all these things that do really, the stress that affects your life, what you're mulling over, what you're, how you're handling stress in general, and how that's abling or enabling your recovery. All of those things play very closely in together that you see pretty quickly physically when you're making demands on your body. a lot of people aren't making huge demands on their body, and they're not seeing how, going to bed at 2 a.m. and getting up at 6 is affecting them.
Right.
Or they're not seeing what their food choices is affecting them. When you start making demands, you are really going to start pretty quickly seeing what affects you pretty fast.
Right. What you're explaining is something that I've thought about a lot, and I've written about a few times, but it's this idea that humans are fundamentally like momentum-based machines, right? Mm. And what I mean by that, and you kind of were touching on it in a very loose sense, is like if your day-to-day is progressively overloading down, like you're slowly decreasing the quality of food you're eating, you're slowly decreasing the quality of sleep you're getting, you're slowly decreasing the physical activity in your life. Like it works both ways, maybe not progressive overload, like down isn't the proper way of explaining it, but the idea is that your body wants to keep going whatever direction you're going. And so by setting foot in the gym and you start actually putting your momentum in a positive way, it cascades into these other elements of your life, right? And then once you learn what progressive overload actually means beyond just fitness, you start to see that these small incremental improvements in your life, they all self-feed into each other. You exercising allows you to play more with your kids, which tires them out more, which makes them sleep better, which allows you to sleep better, which makes your fitness better. It all comes together into this very holistic thing. And that's what we're trying to approach with Lucid Fitness, is this idea that if you isolate fitness and isolate nutrition and isolate mindfulness, like you just don't fully understand the implication of each of those little things on each other. And so going back to what we were saying about the tracking is like, if you're not keeping track of how you're eating and you're not keeping track of how you're thinking and all of these elements outside of the gym, you're going to see it very clearly in your tracking of your fitness. It's like, why is every Monday all my weights go down or all my reps go down? And it really makes you think how, okay, well, every Sunday night I'm up a little bit late drinking that extra glass of wine before going into work. And those sorts of things, it starts to create this like very self-feedback mechanism, which we're trying to help you find.
Yeah, paying attention to it. It's pretty easy to not pay attention. It's very easy to just let things happen at you. But once you get into the habit of clocking those little things around you and how it's affecting your life, you can't help but start clocking all of those things and how they're affecting your life and how you can improve things here and there. And that's something that we want to help you be able to do, is we want you to be able to be mindful and be able to check in with yourself just on a whim and going, you know what? I'm going to do better this time. I'm going to change this time. I'm going to do something else this time. Or, that was a mistake, that we're going to move past it. We're going to choose something else, and just be able to constantly be able to do.
Change is weird. Change is also powerful though.
Yeah.
It's something where most of the time in this sport, you're going to be uncomfortable. And we talked about this before in the previous video. It's like the whole name of the game is to be uncomfortable. Be uncomfortable trying healthier foods, being uncomfortable lifting more weights, being uncomfortable sitting with your own thoughts for a little while. All of those things that discomfort is what carves you into a stronger, more capable person. And it's undeniable after a while. Again, going back to what we've mentioned, pretty much every time we speak, is the positive feedback loops. They're undeniable after a while. And that's why it's so powerful, is once you apply this first few, years, 2 years, 3 years of application, then it reaches the point where it's so ingrained in your life and such a powerful mover in your life that you don't want to stop, because you've just seen this massive change in yourself. And so that's why we are trying to cater to beginners, because I think that's where most people fall short, and most people are failing within the first year, I think. Why should we continue to create more and more content for the people who are already hooked, already growing? It's kind of just patting yourself on the back at that point. And so we want to really cater to the people who can most improve by applying these principles. How do we get these people to that spot where they feel comfortable continuing their journey?
Change will always be challenging, but it's taking change from being challenging and scary to challenging and a thing to conquer, right? A thing to be proud of the change. Lots of beginners go into the gym and they want to see change in their body, but if you're already stepping into change being scary on top of being challenging, you're setting yourself up to hinder yourself more than help yourself.
Right.
But if you can go in and realize, yes, it's going to be hard, but I have people with me, I have a support structure with me that's encouraging me beyond this being challenging, that it's challenging in a good way. It's pushing myself in a good way. I have people that are telling me that I can do this regardless of how it feels, and begin to make that snowball that will then eventually roll, that momentum machine.
Community is hugely valuable. Absolutely. Right? Having at least a few people that you can confide in on your fitness and nutrition journey, even if they aren't on the same journey, right? Just like somebody who's there listening and giving you that positive motivation is powerful. But at the end of the day, this is a solo sport, right? Nobody else can carry the weight for you, right? Nobody else, you could hire a professional chef, but you make the conscious decision to eat the food, to eat the healthy food. Nobody can eat that healthy food for you. And so that's why I try and we try to specifically explain the things that are your choice, your decision, and try to build tools to reduce the friction around that so that you can focus on those things that we can't do for you. The things like we were saying earlier, I can't tell you what's hard. You have to figure that out. You have to figure out what's hard for you. I can't explain to you how it feels to be challenged, right? You have to push yourself and challenge yourself. But we can give you some tools. We can give you the mechanisms. We can give you guidance on that. But you still have to do that, right? You still have to apply the progressive overload. You still have to step foot in the gym and embrace the challenge and the fear that is there, because we all had it starting out, right? It's the name of the game. It's how it works. And not being able to get this through this initial period of extreme discomfort holds back the vast majority of beginners, because they either settle into something that's not continuously pushing them, or they just quit altogether. That's all too common. So we're trying to make it so that all you really have to think about is actually doing it. Everything else is kind of worked out for you. It'll evolve as we go. It's not going to be perfect from the get-go, but as we get feedback from the community and they tell us, it's like, yeah, we're using your tool, we're using your community, but there's something missing. Let's figure that out. Let's figure out what the community needs and allow us, the people who can focus on building these tools, build that for you. And so that's really what we are striving for here, is allowing that massive feedback from these beginners and really honing in on it's like, okay, well, we need more personal one-on-one time with another human. We need more tools. We need whatever it may be, we can build it. And we just need it's been a long time since we've been beginners, so we need the feedback to help us find, the next tool, the next means of helping you guys.
Easiest way to grease up that momentum, make it as frictionless as possible for you to make those steps. Because we do realize that those steps are very hard. Right. They are. Like, no one's going to tell you that it's not really hard to do, because it is. But everything worth doing is going to be hard.
For sure.
It just is.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. And the faster you get to the point of understanding that that's not a bad thing, that speed bumps and hills to climb and walls to crawl over are not bad things. They're good things. They're things that help you grow and conquer. The faster you're going to get to where you want to be in life.
To tie it back to progressive overload, that progressive overload gives you clarity on that. it shows you the improvement, right? It puts you on this structure, this more like regimented means of improving, right? If you just go in and you intuitively lift for the rest of your life, every time you have a bad day, it's going to mess up your strength. But you get to the gym, you look in your logs, you're using the app, and you see, I'm going to do this today. That's what I'm supposed to do. All that other stuff just kind of washes away. And so that's the beauty of progressive overload, is like, once you embrace it, once you really know what it is, and you start to really feel that, it becomes ingrained in everything, and it becomes much more of a second nature type thing with a lot of what you do.